Insightful conversations geared towards empowering not just the citizenry, but practitioners and those who aspire to be, so that ultimately we have a more informed and empowered society. To do that, I'm Ayanka Will, and I'm joined by subject matter experts, this time talking about storytelling and accountability. And of course, we are also joined by the Honorable Minister charged with responsibility for communication in the Office of the Prime Minister, the Honorable Symon de Nobriga.
Thank you very much.
We've been having these conversations with other persons, subject matter experts, and today we are joined by Tyreece Daniel, the CEO of Tydale Creative Works Limited. We are also joined by Rhoda Bharath, who is also at the University of the West Indies, but this morning wearing many hats, specifically that of the academic literacy instructor at the University of West Indies, digital communication consultant, and probably more notably as a prolific face and space on the social media channels, particularly on Facebook, right?
Yes, particularly there.
So I'm excited to have this conversation to get diverse perspectives, but I really do want to start, Minister, with policy, because as we know, we tell stories naturally, and so there must be some framework as to how we do that. What does policy look like for us now?
Well, I don't think that the policy is really guiding in terms of how we are creating these stories. I think that any ministry speaks in a certain way, and of course, as we have said across these conversations, even in those spaces, the way you speak changes depending on the demographic that you're looking at, as well as the platforms that you're operating on. But I do think that it is necessary. And from a policy perspective, we have been very clear that open government is critical. A government that is open to the population, speaking about what they're doing, but in there comes the necessity for accountability. And any government that wants to have real and informed conversations has to be accountable. So I think in there lies a desire, one, to communicate, two, to communicate regularly, and then three, to communicate effectively. And in that third component is where storytelling comes into play. So I think that I'm looking forward to this conversation, particularly with the two persons who have joined me on the panel. And I think that from a policy perspective, we are driving storytelling, we are driving engaging content, and we ultimately rest on a position of ultimate accountability.
I'm glad that you brought accountability into the forefront because, like I said, telling stories is easy. Making sure that you're accountable for what you say is another part of that story. And I think when we think of storytelling, joining or utilizing fact has been some trouble. So let's talk a little bit about accountability and why is it important?
Well, let me add to what, and I'm going to be calling you Symon for the entire interview. Not minister, not honorable minister, Symon, because it's going to allow for the narrative that we're building here to flow. So if we're talking about narrative and accountability, the first thing that anybody at all, whether you're an oral storyteller, whether you're a scribal storyteller, whether you are the honorable minister for communications within the Office of the Prime Minister, you have to think about what is the experience I want my audience to have. Any storyteller has to be accountable to the audience, right? So if I'm going to be telling a story to the audience, my first thought is, what do I want them to gain from this? Right. And the journey that I'm taking them on, what do I want them to experience on that journey? A range of emotions, one emotion the entire time. I have to think about those things as a storyteller. And people who are in the area of communications, any kind of communications, whether it's an ad agency, PR, or straightforward factual information, because I mean it's a spectrum.
Right.
You have to be thinking all the time, What's the experience I want the audience to have? And how am I going to be accountable to my audience in providing that experience? Is it going to happen through dialogue? Is it going to happen through characterization, plot, landscape, all of those things? So, and that is how you start thinking about accountability and narrative.
Not so much as an endpoint, but a part of the entire...
An entire experience. You have to think about it as an experience. And that's what guides how I do my lives.
So, Rhoda, I'm glad that you talked about plotting, because Tyreece actually has to quite literally do exactly that. What does that look like, and where does accountability fall into that plot, so to speak?
Well, I think accountability is a big part of it, because when you talk about accountability, you're really talking about trust. And when you speak, do people listen, and what do they do with the information that you say? So for me, accountability is really taking that responsibility for your actions, your motivation, and ultimately the results of your communication. And that leads to a trust and a synergy between you and your audience. And it ultimately creates the way that your message is received. Because you could have the best message in the world, but if people don't trust you, then you lie. You know, because people naturally have a distrust for power, and governments hold power. So you need to show people that you're trustworthy, and that ends up building a relationship of trust and synergy over time.
It definitely demonstrates that narrative transferring through because of the storytelling, and even helps to build the audience, as you mentioned, the trust, but generally just build the audience. Because if I know from the account of persons who I trust, my peers, other persons who are not participating in the program or politically affiliated, are confirming that this is legitimate, have proof that they can link to, as you're saying, threads and links to other stories, then it creates a level of trust, and it will create engagement that we can measure, that we could use, that we could see in the future. But I feel, though, that you did want to add to this one, only because your expression said so.
Well, I want to add to it because I'm remembering that one of the things that we plan to do with the content from these recordings is use it as teaching tools, right? And since it's going to be used as a teaching tool, I think we need to look at a couple of things that they're both alluding to, but not in clear terms. Stories happen in anthologies, right? So if you're talking about a series of stories that you put out, but the public is going to respond in a particular way. And I'm glad that we're talking about how the public responds, because the storyteller is only important if there is an audience. You must have an audience. And what happens as a result of social media is participative storytelling, which is why everybody flocks to social media on a daily basis. People aren't picking up books to read on their own, because you could be part of the whole narrative as it is happening in real time. So, stories about land and land grants and land acquisition are part of a larger anthology of stories about land and land use in the Caribbean, in the New World, in Trinidad and Tobago. So whenever you are talking about the government granting land to any group of persons, you have to think about the background of land stories and how sensitive land acquisition and land distribution is to everybody here. And those are the things that when you begin to tell the story, you have to think to yourself, all right, what are the soft spots for people with this issue that could lead to a particular kind of reader response, right? Sure. And once you've thought about that, that helps to feed into how you develop the narrative and how you develop the experience. So it's not just enough to think about telling the story. You also have to think about, well, I'm using the term here, anthology, but what's the compendium? Because we have a lot of stories, to use another motif. We have lots of stories about pretty princesses in towers and buildings, right? Or in confined spaces. There's Snow White, there's Sleeping Beauty, there's Rapunzel, you're not in any of the fairy tales, by the way.
I appreciate it.
You know, we're glad about that too.
Okay.
But so you have to think about each of these stories, what they're telling and how are they connected to each other. The same way if you're telling a story about land. Yeah. How is it connected to other stories about land? How is it connected to other communities getting land, using land, the acquisition of land, and how is the audience going to respond to it? Because land is a very sensitive issue. And this can happen for anything,
right.
pretty much any topic, right? So you have to think about this one story, is it part of a wider anthology or wider compendium of stories?
And I imagine, Tyreece, that there was some thought to that, to be able to respond to or anticipate those sorts of
Yeah, for sure. I think, especially because as a creator, I've worked in corporate spaces and so on as well. But government is hard to communicate for because it's such a big story, you know, and you have to, you have to be,
You have walls.
But you also have to be a subject matter expert in almost every subject it has.
Subject matter expert, yes. And you also, I think when it comes to government communication, you get into, so let us say we're talking about you get into a room to tell a story.
Yeah.
And you have far more hurdles to jump over than somebody else who is coming to tell the story, right? And so let me put on a different hat now. So not somebody who has taught creative writing. Let me put on the hat of somebody who functions as a consultant doing communications. If you are working for a minister in a ministry, and the population automatically, as he would have, as Tyreece would have indicated, they automatically have distrust for government officials, right?
Authority in general.
Exactly, to authority in general. And of course, that all ties back into our historical situation here, right? So you automatically have distrust for authority in general. Then if it is a line ministry or line minister who you find particularly egregious, there is that to deal up with. Then if it is an area of government service that nobody is interested in.
As a storyteller, what you have to do is make it about your audience, make it very relevant to your audience, make it relatable to them, make it something that they could engage with and share. And that's really the only way to get your message in front of people, because you have to make it interesting to them, you have to make it digestible to them.
The opportunity that we have, particularly at government communications, as we build out that narrative, is also showing the linkages between ministries, right? Because no single ministry is doing something in and of itself that doesn't, more times than not, doesn't directly impact the citizen, but also impact the citizen through another ministry. So Rhoda touched on property tax, and it's probably a prime example of it.
Rhoda didn't say property tax.
You said
tax, generally, but thanks for underscoring it.
Right?
No, we can talk about it.
Right? Here is a very difficult conversation to have, underpinned by the fact that obviously no one likes paying tax.
Yeah.
But how are you, the average citizen, directly benefiting from it? It's a real conversation and there are real benefits. But also, while you have one ministry being the, let's say, the home of the tax, but it's directly impacting
a different ministry entirely.
And directly impacting the citizen through a different ministry.
Now, the challenge for him, not so much me, right? Yeah. So let's say we are both content creators here. The challenge for him would be to create a story that points to how that thing that you don't want to pay is going to be feeding directly into what happens with these young farmers and the land acquisition that takes place. My responsibility, if I had to create content for something like that, would be to show people that this thing that you don't want to pay is actually redounding to your individual benefit and also the benefit of your community.
Right. which is probably easier for you to articulate quite literally because you can actually see it directly.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you have to craft a story. But in either case, we know that it's necessary because we understand the need to meet different audiences, to speak to people differently, the obligation of any agency to speak in a particular way. We have the limitations or the walls, if you will.
But making those connections ties right back into accountability, you know.
Precisely. And accountability is essential for the citizenry to be able to utilize their power to hold the government accountable. It is a cyclical almost process, and it is important. We can identify that. How do we express that to practitioners in the media, to the average citizen? Why is accountability, particularly when it comes to the government, important as a citizen? How do we tell that story?
So, there are a range of things that I wanted to say about accountability. But let me try and keep it as simple as possible. You and I have had multiple conversations about this in very informal ways. People need to start thinking about being accountable to themselves before they can start thinking about holding a government accountable. And I want to explain why, because I don't want to make it sound as if you can't hold yourself to account, you can't hold a government to account. That's not what I mean at all.
Right.
I mean, when you are in a position where you understand for yourself why you are paying a tax, what that tax does. So the accountability there is in you understanding what taxation does in a society. Because no society can exist or build or develop without taxes, right? And when you understand why you are paying a tax and what the tax does, then when the government not doing what it's supposed to be doing with the tax, you are in a much stronger position to buff them.
Right.
So let me give you a little personal story. I live very close to somebody who is a street food seller. I'm not going to identify the street food, but they sell street food. They have their stall right next to my place of abode. They set up on the street, you are blocking access. So residents are impacted, regular pedestrians are impacted, but you are a business, right? You're a small business and you're doing your small business thing. That small business will complain from time to time about the conditions in the area where they're plying their trade. I don't think the residents in the community understand that a business should not be blocking the pedestrian walkway. I don't think the residents in the community understand the impact of taxes and a small business being registered, a small business paying taxes, and all of the ways in which we are all interconnected and we all need to be responsible to each other, not just in terms of taxes, but in terms of laws, right? And so that's where the personal accountability thing comes into being. Because when you understand how all of those little things that I'm talking about, they operate, you can say to the business owner, you ain't supposed to be there. You can say to the police, you need to make sure that that person is not there. You could go to your borough corporation and say to your borough corporation, so is happening, this is not supposed to be taking place. And in all of that, it helps you to understand why you're paying property tax.
Informed and empowered. Exactly. Yeah. When we start talking about disseminating information as it relates to policy or larger agencies, the complexities of power being something that we're averse to, if you will. When do we, or how do we convey the importance to the citizens of utilizing and trusting the media to give us that information to make them empowered and informed?
Well,
what does that look like?
I think we have to start from a position of understanding the audience. So just like you were saying, Rhoda, that people need to hold themselves accountable. I think government also has to start from a position that people don't know, and understand that, that because it's very easy for people working within government to just assume that everyone knows things, right?
Right.
But I'm a person who asks a lot of stupid questions, right? That's how I learn, right? So one of the most stupid questions that I asked the minister was, what is the difference between parliament and cabinet, right? And I laugh because I remember his reaction, right? He was shocked that I didn't know that, right? And what it ended up being is him taking out a whiteboard marker and legit showing me step by step
Granular.
what is parliament, what is cabinet, how it works, right? But that was a stupid question for me to ask. So the Sunday I went to play some football and was around people my age. And I asked the question to them.
Right.
And they asked me, what is cabinet? Right? They didn't know cabinet was a thing. So, and this is common knowledge, this is social studies, right? That is being taught in primary schools and in secondary schools. But as a communicator, you have to start from the position that people might not have done their due diligence.
Right.
So the government has a responsibility to consistently lift the value of the conversation that we have in Trinidad and Tobago. Prime
Right.
Minister does do postcard every other week where he speaks in detail on all the issues surrounding the country. We have a very, in a lot of ways, accountable government, right? So if you're going to speak on an issue, learn about the issue.
Rhoda, you laugh. Why is that? Because really and truly, we like to think that we do. We like to think that we ask the questions and we have the conversations as a people.
Yeah.
And we see the things because, again, we have the platforms now.
Let me tell you why I laugh.
But it's
And I feel
necessary.
Symon know why I laughed. I think the citizens are between a rock and a hard place oftentimes, right? When I started doing stuff on social media, and I think people think I started doing stuff on social media only a handful of years ago, but I really started in 2010. That's when I'd started using Facebook in the way in which I use Facebook. I just wasn't doing lives back then. I started doing lives around 2020. Prior to that, it would have just been posts. There is so much misinformation in print, radio, digital media that when you want, that part of the reason citizens are no longer willing to trust the things that might be coming out of OPM, government communications, is that they spend so much energy sorting through and trying to figure out what is accurate versus what is inaccurate, right? So this morning, I was looking at going through newspaper stories. There was a newspaper article. So the article that popped up in my feed was from a couple days ago, and it says 500,000 people to be without water. That's inaccurate. It is misleading. The desalination plant is down for maintenance this weekend. 500,000 people or 500,000 homes are going to have Caroni water treatment plant, sorry. 500,000 homes are going to be on a restricted water schedule, right? And water from other plants are going to be redirected so that all of the country is serviced, right? As best as can be serviced. But when you have that as a headline, and then you go into the story itself, it's two different things that are opposed to each other. Then you'll have a situation where you've got 3 dailies, and each daily will have a different angle to a story or different information. So if I get up when the day comes and I have to go through 3 newspapers to be able to glean a little bit about a story, and I still have my whole day, right? If I live in South, I have to get up 2, 3 o'clock in the morning to get ready to get to work. If I have children and live in South, I have to get up early in the morning, get the children ready, get them off to school, to get down to work. Wherever work is, work could be central, but either which way, there are a whole bunch of things so by the time I settle down to read news, why is getting information a whole day walk for me at the same time? It shouldn't be a day walk. It should be a situation where I could pick it up, I could read it, I get the information that I need, and I go about my day. That is not what is happening with far too many channels of media in the country. So it has become another job for people. People don't want to put in that kind of hard work, and I don't give them wrong. And that's why I ended up having a platform. Because I would read, I would synopsize, I would put it out in digestible form, and people would decide, you know what? Okay, all right, I could kind of at least trust this person because it seems like they're giving the actual information and they're putting it out in a way that I can understand. Persons like myself have taken over the job that media should be doing, that media claims it is doing, that media says all the time, we need freedom of the press to be able to do this job, and they're not doing it.
And we have had a panel discussion to that end, to not just address the fact or acknowledge the fact that there is work to be done, but also to, again, empower and inform the public as to the other options, like your platforms and other ways of consuming reliable media.
But my point is media is not accountable. Media is not accountable.
So that, let me add to that, because there are things that Rhoda could say that I won't be able to say, but there are things that need also to be said. And I think that there is government is held accountable, and rightly so.
Yeah.
But too often, it is only government alone that is held accountable. And I think that if you are to hold anybody accountable based on what? Your own information is important. And every day, the government is responsible for disseminating information into the public space. There is also the question of what is the average citizen's responsibility to be informed, and to be informed from trusted sources. And trusted sources, as we discussed on another panel, very often, because something resonates with your own belief of truth, does not make it fact. And the government can only and is tasked with speaking with fact. Very often, that fact may not be as palatable to you as somebody who takes to social media,
Right.
or even writing, or even on the radio, or even on television, to disseminate their own opinion in an entertaining way. That does not make it fact. And we can look outside of our own jurisdiction to see real evidence of that. And how does that impact democracy? How does that impact the way in which people view and interact with authority? And how does that impact governance? So these are real and pressing issues, not only being dealt with in Trinidad, but we are to be concerned about it. But that is impacting countries and democracies across the world right now as people become more and more polarized.
Right.
And the question of what is my truth becoming a conversation. That's a real problem.
As opposed to fact.
As opposed
Right.
to fact.
Yeah.
But it also stems from people being more informed. Why
Well-
I say that is because conversations like these, panels like these,
Yes.
opinions, perspectives, and dialogue like this causes persons who may not be, as we said, as elevated as we'd like them to be, as versed, as knowledgeable, are getting there. There is hope, there is possibility, and there is the opportunity for us to create more of those spaces for that to happen.
And I'll tell you from a government perspective, when we were fleshing out our government communications division, it was very, very important, and that conversation that Tyreece is talking about is a perfect example of it. It was very, very important for us to get young, informed voices to be part of that conversation within government communications, so to populate the actual department with young, informed persons. And even in that, there was also the learning curve to also be informed across government. So what are ministries doing? Because even with these informed persons coming in, our Monday morning meetings looked and sounded a certain way at the start, but now as you yourself become subject matter experts, not only on individual ministries, but on a whole of government narrative, tying into what you were talking about previously, as we build out what is happening across government, delivering on specific policies. It is important that as we brief with Tyreece or with GCD or with Information Division, as we brief across our platforms, that we ensure that we are speaking in a certain way. It is important that we are speaking in a certain way, understanding that some people are more informed than others. And the conversation with Tyreece was eye-opening for me. We could have taken a position that, we could have taken a condescending position,
Absolutely.
right? But the truth is that Tyreece coming into a briefing session and saying, listen, there's a reality out here. The people who feel that they are informed may not necessarily be informed.
And not necessarily be informed, and I get that. I also think that one of the other challenges that you face with government communications is this. There are two types of media houses in the country. You have government communications and you have corporate communication. All of the other media houses are privately owned media houses, right? The TTT is the only government or state-owned media house. As a state-owned media house, especially since historically it's been around for several decades now, it has the mandate of servicing the population in a particular way. Corporate journalism does not have that responsibility. Corporate journalism serves the needs of the stakeholders, its shareholders. And corporate journalism here has always set itself up as being the opposition to the government, whoever is in government, right? That's how they set themselves up. And whether or not the information you are putting out is factual information, the angle that they tend to take is to counter whatever information is put out. So, and that's a tension, a conflict, because conflict is important in narrative.
We actually referred to it on a previous panel as a healthy tension between, or there should be a healthy tension between media.
Yes, there should be a healthy tension, but the tension is no longer healthy. It's no longer healthy.
It needs another tension for it to be healthy. It needs a tension between the consumers of the information and the media as well. Because we as the people who reading and taking in the information have to hold them accountable. Because every article that is written has a name under it.
Well, let me tell you.
They're telling you who the reporter is.
Let me tell you what the major problem there is. The minute any government at all decides that it is going to set up more stringent ways of holding media accountable in this country, the noise that is going to come up is freedom of press, right? Let me finish. Right, let me finish, because there's a real world example I want to give here.
Yeah.
Several years ago, there was a bold front page story that said, and this is because I just read the ruling related to the story a couple weeks ago. Bold front page headline, front page on a Sunday. This minister gave instructions to this, released funds to say, give the wife however many millions of dollars. Front page headline, blaring headline. If you see something on a front page, you are assuming that because it made the front page, that it is verified information, right? It is hard news, verified information, because it meant that the reporter had to have 3 sources. The editor had to look at the story, vet the story. The news editor, and then the editor-in-chief, because the editor-in-chief is who makes the decision for this story and headline to get onto the front page. Then from front page, The rest of the story is told on page 3 and then page 5. Then later on in the week, follow-ups to the story is told, right? The only way the newspaper could have been held to account for that story was a lawsuit. And it took 4 years for the lawsuit to go through the court system. And when you came to the end of the legal process, turns out that not one shred of evidence was ever provided for this story.
Yeah.
Right? That story made it from a journalist to a news editor to an editor-in-chief to a front page. Now, when you are in a situation where you are the average citizen and misinformation is published about you, how you holding the media to account? Who holding the media to account?
Well, what the average citizen needs to do is to learn how to organize themselves into large numbers of people and hold people to account for it. Because at the end of the day, the newspapers and the news stations depend on us, right? If it is that we don't watch their content, if we don't consume their content, then they go out of business, right? If they don't have people to watch it when they put out ads and so on, right? Then people are not going to invest in ads, and they are going to lose money, and they are going to run out of business. So what people need to do is to say, well, if you feeding me food with cockroaches in it, right, I go on. You know, me and everybody gone. We're not coming to shop at this place anymore because what you feeding me is not good for me.
Now, I am old enough to remember a time before social media. And I am old enough for Tyreece will not be, and I don't know if Ayinka is. But I remember a time where you went to certain places to get fact, and we understood what a lie was, and we understood what rum talk was. But now we sort of package it.
There's a lot of gray areas now.
But we also package it in these hygienic terms like disinformation and misinformation. But a lie is a lie.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? And the problem, Tyreece, the problem that we are all tasked with when you sit on the side of the fence that wants to have a properly informed population who makes the best decisions based on the information that is available to them, is that these platforms, when we talk about accountability, there is a complete lack of accountability in these platforms. And that is what I was hearkening to when I talked about us holding the government to account.
Yeah.
And it is always, and too often, that is where the finger is pointed. When it comes to accountability, that the government must be accountable. But we have too often people that are utilizing platforms for clicks and likes, and very often to monetize their platforms through infotainment and through bacchanal and through rum talk. And social media, unfortunately, is an aggregating space for a lot of these people that prior to that, you just know that that's not somebody you ought to take on, because they're talking to a small audience and people acknowledge them for what they are.
Yeah.
But now, that platform has now opened not just 1.4 million people, but too often.
It comes back to what Tyreece was saying about algorithms, right? And the fact that what people consume is what they want to consume, because the more you keep searching for particular things, blah, 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 blah. Good. So you have those algorithms, and those algorithms are consistently feeding you. And if every day of life you're getting up and you want to see what this particular social media person
You're looking for bacchanal.
You're looking for backs, right? You get up and you go on, and I sure you just do it, eh?
Not me.
Go online, you're going to check to see what this person put up. That's what's going to happen. And if I am the person whose platform you're coming to, and I realize, well, you know what? Every time I put bacchanal up, this is the amount of engagement I'm getting. I am going to put up content that is rage baiting.
So let's take it back to the
conversation
of that journalism.
Ayinka trying to bring us back on track.
Only because.
Thank you, Ayinka.
Only because ultimately you are in agreement
Yeah.
There is a level of distrust. There is a need for higher standards of delivery and accountability from our media. There is the obligation of the government, and they have been adhering to it largely, to become almost like a source that we can trust, biases aside. But it brings us back to the need for an informed, empowered, intelligent public to now utilize their own investigative reporting skills to determine or discern what is misinformation, disinformation, and how they treat with it. My challenge, to bring it back to the umbrella of storytelling and accountability, is that we are seeing exactly what you're saying, Rhoda, that we get the responses, we get the engagement, we get the participation, the beautiful two-way communication that we so want to be able to create policy and give feedback on those stories that are emotive, on that style of storytelling that is bacchanal. So where now are we, not just the citizens, but the storytellers,
I want to clarify
on
something.
how we do that?
I don't think that it is the responsibility of the consuming public to do the investigating. I want to make that clear.
Okay.
I don't think it is the public's responsibility to be the one that's doing the investigating.
Or to be informed?
Hang on. I think it is the public's responsibility to be able to develop the skills to discern, right? And to analyze, critique. That's where their responsibilities are. Because I don't, let us assume that he is Joe Public. I am not going to assume that you have the skills to go and hunt down information to figure out what is correct.
Okay.
So it's my responsibility, if I am working in media or government communications, to put the information there. It becomes your responsibility to, read, digest, analyze, and determine this making sense, this not making sense.
Agreed.
And you see the thing that not making sense, I'm putting that to the side until I find something that making
Agreed.
sense. So that's where I
So
stand.
for me to clarify, is
Yes.
the air quotes that were not visible enough.
Yeah.
I say this to say that the public also needs to understand that they do now have a challenge where they cannot just use one single source. And I believe it would have been better addressed in one of the previous panels, that we acknowledge it exists, the need to not just go with one version, but perhaps consult others. Maybe investigative journalism was too strong a term, but we are in agreement.
Yeah.
The question now is how the storyteller, or rather the considerations therein. We want to make sure that we continue to be accountable. We want to make sure that we give them as much information as possible to make those informed decisions. And we are in unison with that, moving forward on how we tie in accountability and storytelling. We've made the distinctions, and we've given persons a lot of food for thought from those anecdotes. But let's talk about the positives therein. We've heard the negatives. We have good examples. We have instances where it has been successful. Can you share those?
So I think in general, what I would tell you is this. From a government communications standpoint, I think that what we have seen across ministries is actually an improvement, and more, not an improvement only in the quality, but in the quantity. An improvement in compelling engagement. Okay. So one of the chief things for me was to know, you know what you don't know, which is why we needed to bring different voices in, younger voices in, and also to sit down and have real conversations with talented young people, not restricting ourselves just to a 3 or 4 or 5-page press release that will never be disseminated in any real way to the general public, but taking the salient facts out of that, out of an event that may have happened, but more so is going to happen in line with government policy, and saying, okay, let us now inform the public in a way that resonates with our natural creativity, that resonates with our natural desire to share and to listen, to be and to be part of a story. And I think that we have seen that growing. We have seen that growing, not just, as I said, in silos that may reside in a ministry that is speaking about what they are doing, but also a whole of government narrative, bringing ministries together and getting those ministries themselves to start speaking to each other in informal settings as well as formal settings. And I think, listen, if we are going to have this conversation, I think the first thing I should say is follow Trinidad and Tobago government communications to be able to see compelling communication that speaks from an impeccable source and as a subject matter expert on government. Follow these platforms in order to get that information. But I think we have seen some real improvement there.
There are a number of positives that I've seen. I'll talk about it from my perspective as somebody as a social media content creator, right? Because I approach my lives, doing my lives, much the same way I approach doing my classes at the University of the West Indies. The idea has been the entire time to have my audience like take a course, right? So between 2020 to now, the focus has always been, we go back to come forward, right? So I use the concept of Sankofa, go back, come forward, and we connect the dots, right? And what I have noticed with certainly the engagement that the people that follow my platform is that there's more connecting of dots, more remembering and looking at past incidents and how past incidents have fed into whatever is the current issue that we're looking at. And for me, that is a useful and positive thing. And so that's one of the things that I am particularly happy about. I've also seen a change or a shift in how issues are being discussed. And what I've noticed with my followers is that even when I was not active, because I took a hiatus, they were, why are you scoffing? They were going to this other links, platform spaces that I would have gone to get information, like government communication, social media channels, to get information, to be able to say, okay, you know what, this is what was said here, that is what. So for me, that's important. Building those skills in your audience and remembering all the time, because as we're talking about narrative storytelling and accountability, that the audience has as important a role in the story as the teller of the story. And so when the audience feels empowered to be able to participate in the story, that helps to hold the storyteller accountable. And so that's the positive that I've seen. But why my mind wandered a little while ago was, I was thinking about all of the things that government communications is doing now with respect to new media and making itself very, very accessible to a range of audiences. And I'm also thinking about the importance of government communications to not forget that you have an audience that remembers analog.
Yeah.
And they would actually be comfortable being able to access analog in a sense. I'm not necessarily meaning turn on a television and tune, but I mean like a...
It's very analog.
Right,
Rhoda.
which is very analog. And I'm giving my age away, that's
No,
fine.
I want to tell you, Tyreece was very confused with this part.
He was
He has no idea what that
Right.
is. Let's
Okay, so basically, TTT has its YouTube channel, which I find to be very important and very useful. I think that AVM.
AVN, yeah.
Well, I remember it as AVM.
Yes, I know.
Because I'm that old, Dale Kohler Singh.
Yes.
Right? AVM or AVN, whatever is being called now, it's important to not forget the importance of something like that.
So I want to tell you, this conversation over the last few episodes has been primarily guided by new media, but you are absolutely correct. We see every platform as a quiver
In the bow?
an arrow in the quiver.
Right, good.
So yes, those are conversations, quite frankly, I would have had up to this week. And with both at the board level at TTT, as well as with the CEO who would have been part of that conversation, to say that even as we are having this resurgence, let's say, of government communications happening in the social media space and on digital platforms, there is a real and important role that TTT has played historically, and any strategic plan for state-owned television must, while it embraces the digital platforms, must look at its role as free to air.
Because Gen X is here, and Gen X is going to be here for at least another 4 decades.
And in that conversation, Rhoda, it is important that too often when we speak about TTT and we think about television.
Yes.
Right.
And where's the role of radio in that as well?
Correct.
Which is an ongoing and real conversation.
Much like this one, because we can delve into so many facets of it, heavily on the media part of things, but more so, we have spoken on the things that we can utilize and we can put into action. That we do need, yes, more accountability from other entities in the communication game. But I think it was important to underscore to the individuals that they too play a part, especially since this is a much more open and accessible communication scheme, if you will, from every angle. So we have started the conversation. It will probably continue well beyond this episode, but that's how we're going to wrap things for now. As the minister rightfully said, joining us on the platforms to get more of the media exchange.